This hourly segment is brought to you by Goldilocks, offering smart security systems to homes and businesses. Call Goldilocks at 708-889-5600.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Northwestern University in the news. Amy, you know what that means. The value of my degree will be declining. The Trump administration adding Cornell and Northwestern to its list of hold that spend. Reportedly freezing $790 million in federal funding to Northwestern and more than $1 billion to Cornell.
You know how Northwestern found out about it, too? The mainstream media. New York Times did an article, and that's how. The
money was frozen in connection with several ongoing credible and concerning Title VI investigations prohibiting discrimination in programs and activities that receive federal funding. This builds on previous announcements about $510 million in grant money to Brown, $9 billion to Harvard, Columbia, of course, which caved or sort of kind of caved. Princeton, last week, research grants totaling $210 million. Even these universities with big reputations and prodigious endowments, that's real money. Real money. Let's start there with our friend Professor William Jacobson, clinical professor of law and director of the Securities Law Clinic at Cornell, founder of LegalInsurrection.com and president of Legal Insurrection Foundation, as well as the Equal Protection Project. Professor Jacobson, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
I don't know if Cornell's going to be able to afford you anymore.
Get your resume ready.
My computer login still works.
That's good. That's a good sign.
Whether my swipe card works remains to be seen. This is, it's real money.
Well, I mean, and this is, we're talking about some of the high-profile universities, the sort of the status universities where there's been a lot of ugliness, and so they're easy to target. But I mean, there's 4 dozen universities on the list. In fact, Nikki Neely from Parents Defending Education just posted about filing a complaint against Indiana University for Title VI violations. And I know you've been in this business, too, as well. So this is much bigger than just the, quote-unquote elite universities.
Yeah, it's worse at the elite universities. They're the ones who get all the attention. But it goes beyond. At Equal Protection, we filed cases against many universities and who were not, quote-unquote elite, many large public universities, including in Illinois. And the problem of how you want to phrase it, a kind of DEI-infused reverse racism, DEI discrimination, which manifests itself in many different ways, is a problem throughout higher education. It's really been captured in many ways.
Well, and so the impact on this, because it's the response from universities has been rather muted. And perhaps that may surprise people. You would think that the professoriate and the administrators would be, pushing back in a very public way and being very publicly critical. And instead, they've taken, for the most part, a rather, subtle approach. They've been rather understated in trying to work with the Trump administration to avoid the loss of these funds. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, it's really strange how the universities have reacted. I think you're going to see a circling of the wagons. I think you're going to see people playing victim. And what they're not going to do is look inward and look at how they have become completely divorced from the population that funds them. And that's, I think, part of the problem at the administrative level.
But they're getting pressure. I mean, we've seen some, petitions circulating among the professor being critical of the administration, like we saw at Columbia. So then the administration is getting squeezed from both ends, from its professors, to some extent from its students as well as the Trump administration. And trying to walk that line must be difficult. But it seems to me that they're worried about things other than the Trump administration, frankly, and their professorate and their students, which is why they're deciding to play ball with Trump. And I think it has a lot to do with the endowments that confer status, as well as the limitations of making up that funding from their endowments.
Well, the endowments are not as open as people think. It's not just like you've got, $11 billion in the bank and you can just pull it out when you want. Most of that money is legally restricted. Mm-hmm. It's money that is governed under, IRS rules and other things like that when it's an endowment. And it's often restricted by the donor. So the donors donate the money to the endowment to be used for a particular purpose. And I'm not saying that they can't access some of it, but it's not like, a university. I think Cornell's got $11 billion or whatever the number is. They can't just write a check for $11 billion. They have to figure it out. Now, there are workarounds and there are ways they can access the funds, and they're allowed to use a percentage a year. But I think that's a little bit of a misconception to just say, hey, this is their endowment, and assume that that's free cash they can use.
Right. And I mean, and being at Cornell, I mean, it does seem to me that part of the the air around some of these places is Harvard has a $50 billion endowment and Princeton has a $40 billion endowment, whatever the numbers are these days. But that's part of sort of the cachet of those places, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it is. Again, I think the problem that a lot of people have is they see tons of money being spent on things that are not even related to the research that the universities are complaining about. In many ways, it's the reaction from Northwestern and Cornell and others. Oh, you're going to kill kids with cancer because you're going to cut back cancer research. And they're trying to hold us hostage to that sort of stuff. The reality is that federal funding, while it might go to a particular project, the universities grab a huge percentage to cover their general overhead. And that's one of the things Trump has been trying to cut back, which is being litigated now. That, Cornell, I believe the number is close to 60%, that if you get a grant at Cornell, the central administration, I believe, pulls between 50 and 60% of it to cover their own overhead. And so when we're giving them these money, it's not just to fund this professor's research lab. It ends up subsidizing the entire university. And then we look at what the entire university is doing, and we say, we don't want this. So that's the problem. The problem is that the universities don't use the funding just for the research. They use it for a lot of other purposes.
Right. A lot of that money is restricted, but a lot of money is also fungible, and as you're pointing out. Something else happening on campus, it's not just the high-profile Mahmoud Khalil case in Columbia. We have a story in Illinois that half a dozen University of Illinois, Chicago, Northwestern, and University of Chicago students have had their student visas terminated. The details have not materialized as to why quite yet, but you assume it's going to be something similar to Khalil at Columbia because some of these undergrads are similarly oriented. And the claim continues to be this is an improper restriction of free speech, and this is not consistent with university values, with American values. What do you say in response to the free speech argument?
Well, a couple of things. First thing is if you're here on a student visa or even if you have a green card, you're subject to the immigration laws. And if the government has a ground under the immigration laws to remove you because you're advocating for a terrorist group or you're advocating violence or you're actually organizing violent action, that's grounds to remove you, not a free speech issue. The second one is that when you're taking over a building, when you're setting up blockades on campuses, when you're shouting down speakers, when you're intimidating other students and preventing them from getting their education, that's no longer free speech. So Mahmoud Khalil, to the best we can ascertain, because the government hasn't had to really put forward its evidence yet, the best we can ascertain, it's not just because he says, well, I support Palestinian rights, therefore you're being deported. It's that he was the leader of an organization that terrorized Columbia University to the extent that Jewish students were afraid to walk around with Jewish stars around their necks for fear of being harassed and intimidated, whose organization declared that its goal was the destruction of Western civilization. If you're an American citizen, you know what? We got to put up with it. You're entitled to it. But if you're here as a guest, we don't have to put up with it, and we shouldn't have to put up with it. And organizing violent takeovers of buildings and organizing that sort of campus harassment campaign is not a free speech question.
Yeah, but what if you're not involved in political protests and you're simply playing basketball? You're a center at Duke University, and the night of the championship game, to get into the championship, the Final Four. The center there found out that he possibly faces deportation because the Trump administration announced new visa policies.
Well, I'm not familiar with the details of that case. I've seen the headlines. I think we'd need to know what is the basis. I mean, an administration is entitled to change the terms and conditions, of visas and letting people into the country. So I don't know his case. I don't know whether he's being punished because of his viewpoints.
Because he's a South Sudanese national, not because of his political viewpoints.
Yeah, well, the president has almost complete control over those sort of immigration, factors, those visa factors. So it may be unfortunate for him, but it doesn't sound like it's the same sort of case as Mahmoud Khalil that people are talking about. And so I have no particular view on South Sudan. I'm not that familiar with it, but certainly there are countries we do not allow people to come here from, and I can't assess whether that's good or bad. Obviously, it's not good for him, but, the government does have the power to regulate who comes into the country.
Another free speech issue, or at least that's what the Associated Press is claiming it is, their access to the White House press room. Huge victory for the AP and free press, so declared Axios after federal judge Trevor McFadden issued a preliminary injunction in the AP versus Budowich case. That it's just an injunction. This is still yet to be fully litigated. But is the AP case really a free speech case, or is it more an executive power case?
Well, I think the argument is that they were punished not because the executive is setting general ground rules applied to everybody for who can attend, the press conferences, that they were specifically singled out because of their, viewpoint. And that viewpoint discrimination can be a First Amendment violation. I think it's a little trickier because we all know that for a generation there has been viewpoint discrimination in favor of left-leaning and, legacy media. So the Trump administration probably shot itself in the foot legally when it announced that it was, why it was, excluding AP. But I don't think it's that easy a case. I don't think it's as simple as that. That's the argument, and that's the argument the judge apparently accepted at this preliminary stage. I think the White House should have a lot of discretion as to who it lets in to its press conferences.
Well, right. I mean, James Toronto, writing in the Journal about the judge's opinion here. Does Judge McFadden want to spend the next 3.5 years micromanaging the White House press shop by refereeing endless disputes by Trump and the AP over a settlement or a permanent injunction, probably bound for a higher court? Even the court notes in its injunction that the president is not a party to this case, and the defense has not argued that an injunction would affect his constitutional authority in any way. But in fact, they actually did. The president has absolute discretion to give interviews to whomever he pleases, and the same discretion extends to whom he allows in the Oval Office, Air Force One, and Mar-a-Lago. And again, you want a federal judge regulating those executive decisions about those spaces for 3.5 years. That seems like an untenable position.
Well, that's the position the federal courts have put themselves in on a whole host of issues that are being litigated, that they're essentially micromanaging the executive branch. Again, here, the judge, who was a Trump appointee from Trump 1.0, found a First Amendment violation. If the Trump administration had simply said nothing and said, okay, this month AP's not on the list, I don't think anything would have happened. But by announcing that they were punishing AP's viewpoint, that's what gave them a potential, constitutional claim. So, yes, I think that is the problem. I mean, I argued when the judge in Rhode Island, the federal court judge, imposed a freeze on freezing funding that, these other judges also refused to allow the government even to refuse. Now they've been overturned. Refused to allow the government even to review contracts for fraud and things like that, and said, pay it all next week. I said, you should be in there every single day saying, Judge, we've discovered this problem with this. Can we pay this? Can we pay that? You should be in court 3-4 times a day, and these judges will regret appointing themselves as effectively administrators of the executive department. And I think that's the same thing with the press relations. The federal court, not all of them, some judges have refused to go along with this, but in particular districts, particularly D.C., Southern District of New York, Massachusetts, the judges have really overstepped their boundaries.
Yes, and so the Supreme Court's slapping down some of those judges specifically and generally about those overreaches, the Alien Enemies Act, the ability to terminate people on probationary status, the ability to stop paying these DOE grants. Did you think that will be sufficient to send the message throughout the inferior courts system that you need to knock off, these Boasberg impersonations you're doing?
I'm not sure. I think it will have some impact. We're now, in the past week or so, we're up to 3 or 4 stays issued by the Supreme Court on lower court injunctions, including some important ones as to where people who are being deported have to bring their cases, that they can't just run to D.C. because they know they're going to get a favorable judge. They've got to bring it to the location. So I think it will have an impact, but a lot of the judges, really, it's unfortunate because I'm a big believer and supporter of judicial review and the judiciary. A lot of these judges have acted like politicians in the worst kind of ways. And it's really, I called back in February for the Supreme Court to intervene, when it was those early cases, that if you don't put a stop to this now, this is going to get out of control. And it has been out of control. You've got the craziest orders being issued, like, pay $2 billion to contractors by tomorrow night. I mean, that was actually one of the orders, okay, that they got stayed. Pay it $2 billion by tomorrow night. The judge doesn't even know who the contractors are. The contractors aren't in front of the court, doesn't even know what the contracts are, but somebody's complaining the world is going to end if $2 billion is not paid to contractors by tomorrow night. And the judge issues that order, and they did get it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court essentially put a hold on it and sent it back down. But that's the sort of stuff we're getting. And first of all, those cases ordering people to be paid shouldn't even be in federal court. If you are a contractor and you have a dispute with the government over what you were paid, you have to go to the Federal Court of Claims. You can't go to federal district court. So this whole thing has been a complete absurdity of judges who don't even have jurisdiction, like Judge Boasberg, or however it's pronounced, Boasberg, issuing an injunction, and the Supreme Court finally had to tell him, you didn't even have jurisdiction here. You shouldn't have ruled on this. And so you have federal court judges, believe me, as somebody, who has been a plaintiff or representing plaintiffs, and our organization looks to represent plaintiffs, it's really hard to get into federal court. You have to show you have legal standing to be there. You have to show you have jurisdiction. You have to show you have venue, okay? Unless, of course, you're opposing the Trump administration, in which case the federal judges ignore all that stuff and just issue what they think is the right ruling.
Yeah, exactly. Well, finally, the Supreme Court has started to push back. It's long overdue, as you say. Some of these opinions weren't opinions; they were ransom notes. Professor Jacobson, William Jacobson, clinical professor of law and director of the Securities Law Clinic at Cornell, founder of LegalInsurrection.com, and president of the Legal Insurrection Foundation, as well as the Equal Protection Project. Professor Jacobson, thank you as always.
Great. Take care.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer. Gain insight into building strong marriages and raising godly children with Focus on the Family with Jim Daly. Each weekday at 11:30 a.m. on our sister station, AM 1160. Hope for your life.
Your business is under attack 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's a fact. Small businesses are the low-hanging fruit.